Ride along each week as we share proven strategies to strengthen your business, energize your team, and create the business success you've been dreaming about. And now, here's your host, Rich Allen.
How do you handle price-sensitive customers? Welcome to the Ultimate Business Tune-Up Podcast, where our one and only goal is to help you tune up your business so you can have the long-lasting success and fulfillment that comes from owning a solid, profitable, and sustainable business. Each week we dive deep into a single topic related to improving your business, improving your team engagement, or improving the relationship with your customers. Today's topic is something that we all have to deal with on a regular basis, and honestly, it's one of the most frustrating and challenging topics in business today: dealing with price-sensitive customers. So let's just rip the bandage off and address my specific question today, which is, how do you handle price-sensitive customers? It seems that no matter how we position our products or service, from time to time we have to face this particularly difficult sales situation. The prospect or customer whose singular motive is to find a way to get your cheapest price. I'm quite sure that as I say this, you've had one or more past customers' faces flash into your mind's eye. That person who frankly didn't care about the quality of your product, or the personal attention your services provided, or the efforts you made to be sure that they would get exactly what they needed and wanted, plus more. I certainly know I've had my fair share of prospects who wanted to do business with me, but their one and only concern was the price. While I wanted to talk about the value I bring, the money I could save them, or the revenue I could help them generate, they couldn't get past the singular topic that captured their attention: the price. Sound familiar? I'll bet it does to many of you. So what's the best way of dealing with these kinds of potential customers? Now, before we get too deep into it, I'll acknowledge that the simple answer to my question is to simply not do business with them. We could just say no, and we could move on and discuss another topic. But that would make this a very short podcast episode. And truth be told, there are often times when, as a business owner, we need and want the business. And on top of that, don't you think it'd be a fun challenge to find a way to convert a price-sensitive prospect into a value-appreciating customer? I certainly do. So if you're up for the challenge, let's see if we can unpack what we need to do to convert at least some of our price-sensitive prospects into customers who truly value and appreciate our unique differentiation. Let me start with the notion that there's no silver bullet when it comes to dealing with price-sensitive prospects and customers. But if we know a little about how their brain works, perhaps we can engage them in a way that might change how they view our products or our services. I'll start by reminding you that I'm not a medical professional. I don't do brain surgery, but I have studied a bit about how the brain functions. Here's my take from a layman's perspective. Our brain has three main sections that we need to be aware of. The reptilian brain, or croc brain, is the innermost part of the brain and is responsible for our survival responses. It controls our fight or flight responses to danger. It houses the amygdala, which detects fearful or threatening stimuli and activates the appropriate fear-related behaviors in response to threats or dangerous situations. The limbic brain, often referred to as our midbrain, is responsible for our behavioral and emotional responses. It's the seat of our value judgment. It's the part of our brain that handles our feeding, nurturing, and caring responses. Our relationships and feelings are controlled by our limbic brain. And the neocortex makes up approximately half the volume of our brain and is the most developed section. It's the logic center where we do analysis and is part of the brain where we compose new ideas. Anytime we're doing math calculations, comparisons, or detailed analysis, we're activating our neocortex. So you may ask, why the lecture on the functions of the brain? Well, because when we're communicating with a prospect or a customer, it's important to understand how our brains are sending and receiving information. If we understand how our brain works, we can be aware of what's happening when we're sharing information with our prospects. Let me share a simple example. When we're communicating with a prospect or customer, we're forming our words in our own neocortex, but they're being received by the listener first in their croc brain. Any message or stimuli gets processed first by their fight or flight center. Needless to say, it's very important not to trigger the croc brain when engaging with a prospect. As you can imagine, a used car salesman approach to selling often triggers the receiver's croc brain and will result in the flight or getaway response. Once they recognize that our message is not a danger to them, then the message will move to their limbic brain, where they process their feelings and emotions. This is why you often hear that we like to do business with those we know, like, and trust. All that gets decided by the limbic brain, the emotions center of our brain. Lastly, if the receiver's brain senses positive feelings and emotion, then they'll push our message along to their neocortex, where they can do the analysis and ultimately make a decision. How's that for a short course on how the brain works? Now, if you're listening to this and you're a brain surgeon, please don't hate me for taking a simplistic view of how our brain works. I'm simply trying to paint a picture that we can use to help us communicate better with our prospects and customers. So knowing this about how messages are sent and received by our brains, what could and should we do differently when dealing with our prospects and customers? My first thought is we should be sure that nothing we're doing or saying would trigger the receiver's croc brain. In other words, we should never pose a threat or danger to them in their minds. Now, I know it seems like nothing we could ever do would pose a threat, but if you're coming on too strong, or you're talking down about who they're currently buying from, or you're trying to scare them into buying your product or service, and all of these approaches are being used today, then you're likely to trigger their flight or fight responses. Secondly, we need to do everything possible to engage their limbic brain in a positive way, meaning our presentation and approach should engage them in a way that makes them have positive feelings for us as a person, for our company, and for our mutual relationship. Think about that for a minute. How much of your sales presentation is about building a positive relationship before you even begin to entertain the idea of selling them something? If you're like most sales-minded people, the conversation moves to getting the deal done long before your prospect is done processing how they feel about you and your product or service. This is why some allow their prospects to try samples of their product or use a free version of their software before asking them to make a purchase decision. Are you incorporating these strategies as part of your sales process? Perhaps you should. The big idea is to have your prospects spend more time processing who you are and what you offer them in their limbic brain before engaging their neocortex, the analytical part of their brain. And when it comes to those prospects and customers who are particularly price sensitive, it's critically essential to not trigger their neocortex as part of your sales process. Just like you want to be cautious about triggering their croc brain, their fight or flight reaction, it's important that you live in their limbic brain, where they process feelings and emotion rather than engage with them on price or anything that triggers their neocortex. So just how do you do that? You focus your attention on what matters to them most. which means you've got to ask a lot of questions about them and their situation. Here's where you have the opportunity to dig deep and ask the 5 why questions. When you ask what they're trying to accomplish by buying your product or service, you respond to their answer with, why does that matter to you? And when they answer that why question, dig a bit deeper and ask, why is that important to them? And when they answer that why question, you sit with that a bit longer and ask them a deeper why question. The goal is for them to think you only want to know about what matters to them at a very deep level, which will keep them happily in their limbic brain, having good thoughts about who you are, how much you care, how sensitive you are to their needs, and how different you are from every other salesperson they've ever met. Now, do you ultimately have to get to the price question? Sure, but that only happens when they finally bring it up. And my experience has been that when I focus on the feelings and emotions of the engagement and keep asking probing questions of prospects, they can go on for hours because most people love to talk about the thing that matters to them the most, either themselves, their family, or their cause. So just go with them and spend time in their world or their cares for as long as they want to stay there. When they're ready, they'll ask to move on. And when they do, they'll move on with a solid sense that they know, like, and trust you, which makes the discussion about how much your product or service costs a fairly easy one, because they'll want to do business with you. I hope that makes sense. And I hope there's an idea or a nugget or a lesson in here that you can take into your business to help you deal with those customers who come to you asking only about price. Just remember, just because they ask about price doesn't mean that's where you have to spend your time. Let them know that before you get to the price, you need to understand a bit more about them and what they're trying to accomplish. Let them know that you're more concerned with them making a good purchase decision than you are about them making a purchase decision from you. Then launch into your why questions and spend time with them on their current reality and their hopes and dreams and their fears and concerns. When they come back to the price discussion, they'll come back with a new perspective, one that puts you in a much better position to be their preferred choice. As always, if you have specific questions or would like to bounce around some thoughts on this topic, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. How we engage with our prospects and customers is important, and I'd be glad to help you avoid their fight or flight response and their need to focus on price alone when making a purchase decision. Thanks for sharing this podcast episode with your fellow business owners. By sharing this with them, you'll be engaging their limbic brain and giving them the warm feeling that you care about their success too. Thanks for joining me today. Be sure to tune in next week when we're going to discuss using process flowcharts and checklists. You won't want to miss it. Meanwhile, if you have a question, suggestion, or would simply like to connect, shoot me an email at rich@tourtoprofit.com. Now go make it a great week, and whatever you do, ride hard.
Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Business Tune-Up. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, find more resources at tourtoprofit.com and connect with Rich by sending a message to rich@tourtoprofit.com. Until next time, ride hard.